everyone, and we have a number of people that have arrived, so maybe we could get started. Leah, we'll let you start everything up. Thank you.
Sure, that sounds great. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Leah Poirier. I am the Autism Support Coordinator with the Truro chapter of Autism Nova Scotia. I'm very pleased to be your moderator for this evening's event. We're going to be learning more about supporting social skill development for people of various ages and stages with autism spectrum disorder. And I will be joined by my co-workers later in this webinar to help facilitate the question and answer. We will be holding the questions until the end of the session. But please type in your questions as they pop into your head so that we can certainly track those and ensure that those are answered properly. I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker. Angela Rudderham will be doing our talk tonight. And Angela was born and raised in Sydney, Nova Scotia. She has a background in social work and has worked with many children and their families across many settings and in various countries. These include crisis centers, family homes, group homes, hospitals, camps, recreation, and schools throughout Australia, England, Singapore, Africa, Western Canada, and the East Coast. Through her travels, Angela developed a passion to meet the needs of underserved and misunderstood youth. Angela returned to Nova Scotia in 2006 and partnered with Bridgeway Academy. There, she's designed and delivered a unique social skills program, and it is also an organization-wide behavior support program. Throughout her 15 years at Bridgeway, she has developed numerous outreach things for parents as well, and students and educators would be included in that. And Angela currently oversees the organization in a shared leadership model as one of 3 directors that are at the organization. And before I turn it over to you, Angela, I'm just going to let everyone know that we are recording this evening's session. And if you need to step away or you wish to rewatch it, then it will be available on the Autism Nova Scotia YouTube channel in the very near future. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Angela. And yeah, we're all very excited to hear about how we can support social skill development.
Thank you, Leah. Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited for the opportunity to get to speak with you. I'm hoping this evening will give us some new ideas for supporting or developing social skills with those we love or care for, or even with ourselves. So if we look at our agenda, some of the things that we're going to speak about this evening, we're going to look at some of the stages of development. And we're going to look at the autistic brain and how it pertains to social skill development. And we're going to learn how to identify when someone that needs social skills instruction. Not everyone with an ASD diagnosis is going to have social differences that will need intervention, but hopefully we'll explore some ideas in how to understand when direct intervention is necessary. We're going to look at how individuals with autism can be supported in developing social skills, and we're going to look at the tips and different strategies for doing that. And I think that's really what most folks are interested in the how-to. So we'll spend a little more time in that section. I'm also looking forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. I'm used to a more informal interaction where I get to answer questions as we go. So don't hesitate to write your questions in something that doesn't make sense or something that you would like to explore further in the question and answer section. And at the end, we'll do our best to get to them all. All right. If you're tuning in, you probably are already convinced that social skills matter, and that having sound social skills is a great predictor for future or for all of our happiness and success. Social networks kind of make the world go round, and our social support systems are truly important to our feelings of security and definitely in times where we need to turn to one another. So throughout the presentation, it's really important to understand that everyone develops differently. There are no really two people alike in their development. There are some kind of typical norms that have been researched and studied. And there are some stages that are really typical that coincide with certain ages for developing social skills. So all that to say, at every age, there are different milestones to look for when we want to check in and see if we are progressing along in what would be typical development of social skills. So we're going to look at that very quickly. Starting really kind of right at the beginning, when you think of your 2 to 3 year olds. That's typically the time when they're looking for attention from others. They are trying to initiate eye contact. They're maybe verbally reaching out. You get that little kiddo in the shopping cart that's waving at someone behind them, a stranger, saying hi and bye. They're starting to take turns talking. They're laughing at silly objects and faces. Ages 3 to 4, and we're able to take turns, maybe in the game of patty cake, or we're mimicking those around us and how they're treating maybe stuffed animals or dolls, and they're able to kind of mimic the treatment as if it's alive. They're initiating verbal communication and starting to use words. And again, these are milestones that are typical. It doesn't mean that is a predictor of anything when these milestones don't happen exactly where research puts it. So, if we're at 4 to 5 year olds, typically children are at that time engaging in fantasy play. If you have a 4 to 5 year old and they're not yet engaging in fantasy play, that doesn't necessarily give us a prediction of anything to come, but that is just kind of a guide and something to look for. So at this stage, they're more used to starting, I guess, to less parallel play with others and more cooperation. So they're taking turns. They are starting to use direct requests like stop or mine. They're starting to mimic those close to them, like mom or dad. And there's I guess a more interest in children around them. When children are 5 to 6 years old, and it's around the time they're starting school, they're starting to get those kind of social norms of using manner words like please and thank you. They start to understand what words might not be acceptable in certain situations. They're a little more strategic in how they're playing. You'll start to see signs of negotiation and bargaining. If they don't want to have a certain monopoly piece, for example, someone wants to be the boot and somebody wants to be the thimble. They may barter and say, well, this time I'll be the boot, and next time you be the thimble. Competitive play. It starts to be interesting, and they're starting to pay attention to fair play and starting to demonstrate some characteristics of good sportsmanship. So they're starting to learn how to lose gracefully, and realize that, if folks want to continue to play with them, that they are, learning some of that gracious manners when they're when they're not in the winning side. 6 to 7-year-olds, they're able to empathize with others. So, and this might be at the time where they start to identify with characters in movies. Sad things are happening maybe in a movie, and they, maybe outwardly feeling those feelings. They're starting to use different postures and gestures that communicate their needs. They can wait their turn. They are able to, maybe tell jokes and listen to jokes. They can consider other people's points of view at this stage. They are, picking up more on the feedback of those around them. So if they're sharing a topic and folks seem disinterested, this is the age and stage where they can pick up on those cues and shift or end the topic appropriately. At this age, they're still struggling to understand the clear difference between right and wrong in a given situation. And because they're 6 and 7, they still may not take direction very well. All of those executive functioning skills that we'll talk about later, that are responsible for impulse control, emotional control, these things are not developed fully yet. So, waiting turn and attention, all those can impact their ability to take direction. So, I speak to a lot of parents on a regular basis who get concerned about, their 6 to 7-year-old in a classroom setting. And my experience is that many classrooms are run differently. And different classrooms have, a different atmosphere or environment and expectations. So some parents will become very alarmed that their child may not be attending well in a class at 6 to 7-year-olds, and they may be told by the teacher that they're not attending well and they're not taking direction well. Again, we need to kind of temper that with what's happening in the class and their age and normal development for a 6 to 7-year-old. Again, those executive functioning skills really aren't strong at that age. 9 and 10-year-olds, their peer and friend groups start to be more important than family. So, this is when you start hearing, well, my friends' parents let them, stay up till 9 o'clock, and my friends are allowed to do this, and my friends are allowed to do that. So they're starting to pay close attention to what other children their age are doing, and their acceptance is very, very important to them at this age. They start to get more independent with their decision making, and they want to feel independent from their family. So they ask to do things by themselves, that they maybe once needed mom or dad to do for them. And it's kind of a first little step for parents too in relinquishing some of that support. Parents can use responsibilities and their chores to earn time with their friends, because again, this is now a motivator for their children. When we get into adolescence, obviously the independence grows and the commitment to peer groups becomes even more important. It will and should, much to parents' dismay, include risky behavior and exploring things maybe that might not be introduced by parents or condoned even. It's their time to test boundaries and break away. They want to impress their peer groups usually more than they want to impress their families, and that's okay. That's part of normal development. Social interactions, start to include more complicated relationships, disagreements, maybe breakups, the ending of friendships, maybe the repair of friendships. They can usually develop long-lasting relationships. And these coping skills start to emerge to deal with these all complex pieces of social relationships. Young adulthood, we start to focus a little more on school success and future outcomes. Maybe work-related activities become really important. Independence and autonomy is really sought out, and employment and relationships can be navigated and maintained. So again, these stages, they're what's typical. Missing milestones isn't indicative of an issue that needs to be have a direct intervention, but they are things to be aware of, and there are certainly times when missing different milestones can be a flag, and it could be an indicator that maybe some direct intervention is required. With a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, we need to understand that there are some differences in the wiring of the brain, and that this is the reason, or the reasons for the impact on social skills. So sometimes, and we'll talk a little more about these types of differences, but sometimes some of the social differences can be misunderstood as choices that the individual is making. And sometimes they are encouraged to develop through consequences and rewards. And we'll talk a little bit why that sometimes will backfire. And one of the main reasons is because the issue doesn't exist in choice. The issue exists here, in what we're looking at in the brain and how it's formed. There are connectivity differences in a brain on the autism spectrum disorder, something they call hypoconnectivity. And basically, what that is like is that the sulci that forms in between different regions and connects them, there is a pronounced difference. The research shows that there's certain areas of the brain, like language production, that's impacted by the different formation and the shapes that are happening. And so when we think of language production, a lot of us think of words and word choice and how we use them and how we process them. But it goes a lot deeper than that. It goes, our inferencing skills, for example. When you're learning to read and you're reading specifically what is in front of you. So see Jane run. And we can say, what did Jane do? And we can read it right there in front of us. Well, Jane ran. It's right in the text. That is usually an area that is not impacted when you have ASD. So factual, concrete, evidence-based information is usually processed quite well. But when it gets into some more complex understanding of language, like inferencing skills, say around grade 6 or grade 7, you start to get into books that are novels, for example. And the text might read something like, Jane spends a lot of time with her grandmother. She bakes, she cooks, they sew together. Jane goes there every day after school. Jane's grandmother passes away, and the question posed might be, how does Jane feel? Well, nobody came and said directly in the text how Jane felt, but it was inferred based on social context and what we know about relationships and all kinds of previous learning. It's inferred that Jane probably felt sad, and then we can make that deduction, and that's an inferencing skill. And that same skill that's affected by language is also a skill that we need to adequately read social situations. So inferencing skills, for example, if I'm at the top of the slide and I see somebody running towards the bottom of the slide, I can infer that if I decide to go down the slide and they keep running at this direction, I may eventually hit them. And that's an inference I'll make. When you have an autism diagnosis, sometimes this area of inferencing can be impacted. And so it's, this language production is one of the direct reasons why there are so many differences that exist socially for someone on the spectrum. So when we look at, strengths associated with a diagnosis, again, I have to stress that everyone with an autism diagnosis is different. But there are some typical things that are expected with a diagnosis. And it doesn't mean that everybody fits neatly into that box. But typically, when you look at the left column here that I have on the screen, that left hemisphere of the brain that's responsible for analytical thought, detail orientation, ordered sequencing, you skip down logic, planning, science. These areas tend to be strong. They tend to not have the same interruptions in the brain development as the right side. So the right side tends to be a little more impacted when we look at the different, I guess, connectivity areas. So on the right side, the things that are responsible for more abstract thinking, intuition, emotional, reading nonverbal cues, imagination, these areas tend to be a little bit more challenging. And again, these are other reasons why social skills are sometimes impacted. So, common differences with autism. I'm gonna say it again. It doesn't mean that if I have a diagnosis of autism, that all of these things will be indicative of how I am. But it is a common characteristic. So, difficulty staying regulated for the response to others. They may appear to be withdrawn or introverted. So these are the types of things you're going to pay attention to when determining if someone needs some direct intervention or support developing social skills. They may struggle with understanding the meaning of different relationships. They could have difficulty with nonverbal communication, just understanding how body language, gestures, facial expressions all relay messages and what they mean. And also how their own body language and face and gestures and facial expressions communicate. They may be described as socially or emotionally solitary, like almost like being in your own little world. Sometimes there are restrictive repetitive patterns or very strong areas of interests and specialized interests. Sometimes a strong preference to routines and transitioning can be a difficulty, or shifting from one idea or thought to another. Sometimes we'll have ritualized speech or behavior. Anxiety is a big cue that social situations are difficult to interpret. And if you can imagine, if you're struggling to interpret social situations and you're in a social situation, it is a lot of anxiety. And I don't know if folks, who don't struggle with that can imagine if you're in a country where no one speaks the language and you're on your own and you have to navigate and it's busy and you're worried about making mistakes or errors, that anxiety is quite significant. So there could be sensory processing differences. sometimes hyper or hypo. We can get over and understimulated. Sometimes emotional and behavioral difficulties, some stemming actions. There is also an impact on executive functioning skills that we talked about a little earlier. And they're important to talk about because, well, not just with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, but with many learning disabilities and ADHD, executive functioning skills are often impacted. So I find they're particularly useful to understand. And here's a little visual of that. So our executive functioning, a lot of that takes place in the frontal lobe. This is kind of like I like to describe it as having a secretary who is sitting in the front of your head to keep track of all of the things that you need to keep track of. And some, secretaries are really keen and effective, and some secretaries can get a little disorganized, right? And so some of those things that executive functioning are responsible for, and if you can imagine, I'm going to talk about some of the executive functioning skills and how they directly impact socializing. So let's just think about a traditional classroom, and students are really trying to fit in. Everybody, say in grade 6, for example, they're all trying to be like everybody else. there's not a lot of tolerance for differences, and unfortunately, they're still trying to fit in. When you have someone who really struggles with executive functioning, there may be a very it may be very challenging to inhibit responses. And so when you have a thought on your brain, you simultaneously, when those other language processes are working, are able to consecutively think of outcomes and think of impact and emotional impact on others. And so, for example, I see a young lady walk into my grade 6 classroom and she got a haircut, and I think this haircut is terrible. I look at it and I make a judgment and I say, oh gosh, why did she do that? If we have good response inhibition, we will simultaneously, think that, well, I shouldn't say this out loud because that person may feel really bad about it. And so even though it's a true fact, the feeling that it might elicit won't be in my favor, and they may react poorly to me. If you lack response inhibition, that is going to be out of your mouth before those other processes take effect. And you can see that with diagnosis of some folks on the autism spectrum disorder, with ADHD, with all different types of learning disabilities. Working memory. That's a fun one. So there's all kinds of different memories, the long-term, short-term, rote. Working memory is an important one. And that's the one everyone, I think, can relate to, because everybody, when you're tired, when you're stressed, these functions are impacted, right? So they're to a degree. Your working memory, if you've ever walked upstairs for your slippers and forgot why you went up, or if you ever went to the fridge and opened it up to get something, you forgot why you're standing there with the fridge door open, that's your working memory. That's when you're holding information in your brain and trying to perform another task. And so in math, to carry and borrow, in the old timey math, these functions, we use our working memory all day long. And those things can be significantly impacted. Emotional control, sustained attention, beginning a task, planning and prioritizing. When we think of planning and prioritizing, sometimes we think of work. either schoolwork or, work as an adult. But planning and prioritizing, also impacts planning and inviting and coordinating a social event or a sports game. These are, skills that if I wanted to invite someone over my house to hang out, I would have to initiate some of these skills to be able to extend that invite and decide what we were going to have to eat and maybe what we were going to do while they were there, and to relay a time and a place and a date. So those things are all really important. Organization, it's not only organization of materials, like, remembering to bring your mittens home, or, where your purse and your keys and your phone are. They're also organization of expressing your thoughts in a way that makes sense for others. So to be able to relay something in chronological order, or just to follow through from beginning to end. Time management, goal directedness, flexibility. Flexibility is the big one. Flexibility is important not only to discover more ways to solve one problem. It's also really important when you're ending a task to begin another task at a directive. So, for example, if I'm immersed in something at work and my boss comes in to tell me, okay, well, we have to start this right away. So we have to stop what you're doing. I need you to come and start this other task. My ability to pull away from what I'm doing and to shut it down and to move on to the next thing requires a lot of flexible thinking. So you can see how, in a typical social setting, these things can be pretty impactful when they're not, exercised and developed. And the great news is that I think that we know through science that brains are plastic and malleable, and that they change, and that they are a muscle, and we can develop pathways in our brain through training. And so that's really exciting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But to continue the discussion about who may need social skills training. Some flags might be that, when they're having or struggling to join in or maintain, their own peer group, when they're having a hard time regulating, when they're frustrated. Some folks can experience meltdowns. And it's a really misunderstood condition. It's not something that someone controls. It has a lot of maybe negative connotation attached to it, because the behaviors obviously look really similar to what maybe someone who is typically developing does when they didn't get their way, or want to attain something. But oftentimes this has to do with a lot of simultaneous sensory demands, and a lot of struggling to process those demands in the moment, and how the brain functions. So it becomes very overwhelming. And sometimes these meltdowns are confused with willful behavior. So important to note. Again, we want to watch out for folks who withdraw in a crowded space, who, really, they're, we all are different, and a lot of us prefer our own company rather than the company of others. But when it becomes concerning is that when we would like to participate in group activities, and we're not able to because of the skills that we have. So someone who needs training may express or display anxiety if they're separated from their closest or most familiar people in their lives. So we know from some wonderful longitude studies from the Frost-Teague Center in Pasadena, California. They had done a lovely study looking at what really contributes to a person's overall feelings of success. And they had to, of course, define success, and they defined it as a sense of independence, that they felt supported, cared for, loved, that they were able to have choice, and the means to support themselves. When they looked at folks who had a diagnosis of a learning disability, they followed them for 20 years to try and figure out, well, how come this pocket of folks, there were a strong portion of folks who described themselves as successful and felt successful. And then there were a portion didn't fare out so well. And so they followed, folks in a longitude study to see if they could determine, and they had a lot of guesses. They thought that maybe, well, social and economic background probably plays into it, and race and wealth, whether or not they went to fancy private schools. And what they discovered is really important. And it's really important for anybody hoping to set somebody or themselves up for success. What they discovered was that there were 7 success attributes. They were a more accurate predictor of future success than any variable like IQ or academic achievement. And they were social skills. So we're going to talk about exactly which social skills they were, but they were, and they're big umbrella social skills. So when I say umbrella social skills, I mean big skills that are made up of bunches and bunches of little skills. And so the social skills research tells us are definitely a bigger predictor of future success. And that really just speaks to the importance of intervention when there are social differences that require intervention. So in that study, and this is the little link at the top if you want to take a moment to copy it down, and I'm not sure if the presentation will be provided, but yes, it will. Leah's shaking her head. This Frost-Teague Center, you can find the study here, and I encourage parents, if you have young folks that you're supporting, go to this website. They have a parent handbook that break down these skills and give lots of amazing exercises. When I say exercises, is that developing those pathways in the brain to develop these very important skills. So right here, folks, these are the skills that were the strongest predictor of future success. And it was fun to find this information years after we developed our social skills program, because they really are the units of our social skills curriculum. Like Leah mentioned, I'm one of the directors at Bridgeway Academy, and we're a school for kids with learning disabilities. And so we have to directly teach social skills to those who require the intervention. And these are the skills. So what they mean, for example, for self-awareness, is that piece that we talked about earlier that folks may struggle with. Self-awareness describes really how we think about others thinking of us. So, an understanding of how our nonverbal process, an understanding of our strengths and needs, that we have an accurate self-image, our self-concept, our self-esteem, Self-awareness is really understanding what our needs are, how to communicate them, and yeah, and basically how our communication is landing with other people. The proactivity piece, that's a really important one. The proactivity is really about empowerment. It's about looking and being able to find what we can control in a situation. And folks who are successful, they really look for opportunities to see what changes can be made to make their situation improved. So, an example on a small scale might be if I am being proactive, I don't look so much at where other people's fault lies or when blame is placed on other people. I look for the piece of it that I can control. So, for example, if I have a teacher who I feel is treating me unfairly, I don't sit back and perseverate on, I hate that teacher. There's no point in even trying. The teacher hates me. I give up. Instead, I think about, well, what steps can I take to improve this situation? Is there someone I can talk to make the change? Is there some type of action that I can do? It very well may be that educator's fault. The fault may very well lie with the other person, but I'm going to see what pieces of it that I can control, and the yeah, and how to. I want to be proactive. Perseverance is another important skill, and it is facing difficulty things. I said difficulty things, but difficult things is what I meant. Perseverance is that, get up and try again, get up and try again. Really important to build perseverance, especially when we struggle with anxiety. Because the crutch of anxiety is, it makes us want to avoid. When we have anxious feelings, they're uncomfortable, and our inclination is to get away from it, avoid it altogether. Perseverance is kind of the skill to counteract that. It's the I can do difficult things attitude. It's that this is really, really hard, but I can do hard things. And that requires a lot of practice and a lot of support and a lot of small, tiny steps. And then someone really awesome that can really point out to you the success of your steps. Goal setting. And this goes back to some of those executive functioning deficits. When you have executive functioning deficits, the components of setting goals don't just happen automatically. When we have a maybe typical development, or maybe a sound set of executive functioning skills, it might be quite automatic to break a large task down into smaller tasks and follow through, have a clear picture of dates and keep that all tracked, maybe without writing anything down ever. And that would be, an example of someone with really strong executive functioning skills. Goal setting being a necessary skill for future success, and it's relying very heavily on those executive functioning skills. Often when those executive functioning skills are impacted, goal setting requires a methodical, strategic, methodic, I guess, method to be able to lay out the steps. So, when we work with kiddos, we teach them that acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T. The S standing for making sure the goal is specific, and the M making sure that it's measurable. You may have heard this. And the A making sure that it's agreed upon, and the R realistic, and then the T that there's a time or a target date set. Having a specific way of understanding goal setting and a practice that is performed each time one sets a goal is really important to create that pathway and what do I want to say, habit when it comes to realizing something that we want to achieve. Effective support systems are really important, and the good news is that they don't have to be large. Effective support systems can be as small as one really good therapist. Effective support systems means that when there are social differences, lens which social situations are viewed through, it's obviously going to have a kind of personalized outlook. And it really helps to have a support system that can offer a different lens by which to see a problem, or a different lens by which to bounce off an idea. Somebody to take that goal setting and say, hey, is my goal realistic? And someone to kind of check and be honest and supportive. And when they got into a little bit of detail describing effective support systems, and that was a really important quality of being effective in their support, honesty. So an effective support system wasn't someone that just told somebody what they wanted. It was somebody that took a very kind and clear and honest approach with their perspective. And then emotional stability, of course. We are in situations every day by which we are, can't be emotional, vulnerable 24/7. Sometimes we have to keep those private moments private, and being able to navigate our emotions and to effectively process them without impacting everyone around us is super important. So again, these are big social skills, and we're going to talk how we're going to teach social skills. I'm going to flip a slide here. That's what we really want to get at. So we want to first, I got to say, 8 steps, 7 steps, whatever we have here. These are kind of the method that research tells us are best practices for developing social skills. And we think of all these steps, folks are going to get intimidated, and you're going to be a little overwhelmed thinking, oh my, I have to do all of these things, and it's a big undertaking. And I promise, just focus one thing at a time, and it'll feel a lot more manageable. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to organize our efforts. And the very first thing we do is we want to try and get a list of the social differences that may require attention. So we want to get to know the person who needs the social intervention. We want to make a list of the things that are most impactful. When I say list, a list of social skills that are most impactful. And we want to take one skill and break it down into its finest point. So let's just pretend one of the things we say the person is struggling with is making introductions. They get in a situation, whether it's on the playground or at a anniversary party, and they are just not going to talk to anybody. They're not going to reach out, and they're not going to engage first. So a lot of times you'll come across curriculum or information about initiating a conversation or introductions. That is a huge skill, and it's required of a lot of little skills. So when we say break it down into its finest point, let's just do that. So let's just say introductions is on our list. And we did this little activity the other day when we were chatting, but if you can imagine, when you have been in a situation, let's pretend it might be a wedding that you know nobody at. You were invited and you're going into the reception and you don't know anybody. Or it could have been a networking event. When you think about how you started up a conversation, just take a second and think about the different steps you took. a lot of social skills curriculum that you read, you know, they sometimes will instruct you to, you know, find a person and, you know, walk towards them, extend your hand, introduce yourself, and tell them something about yourself. I don't know if that's ever happened to me, and I certainly don't see young people on the playground interact that way. You know, sometimes just sitting down and thinking about, you know, how we do something. It can be difficult, but a lot of times those introductions involve, you know, first visually scanning the room, circling around, seeing who most looks like somebody we would have something in common with. Maybe who has the same facial expressions and body language that reflect how we're feeling. We might circle closely and listen to what they're saying. And we might, you know, wait for a break in the conversation. Then we also have to watch how we're being received in that group. So if we break into something and we say something, maybe it's appropriate, then we want to watch for feedback and see if folks are appreciative of our comment or if they're just kind of giving us that the signal that they're not up for meeting anyone new. And so we would, you know, gracefully tap out and move on to the next thing. So those are, you know, quite a few skills under the one umbrella of introduction. So the takeaway from this first step is that you want to make a list of skills, then you want to break them down to their finest point. We always want to, and a couple little do's and don'ts here, we always want to provide a verbal script for everything we're doing. So when we're helping somebody understand that social world around us and how it works, it is very helpful if we are talking out loud about why we said hello to somebody, or why we just waved, or why we stopped and held the door open for someone who had their arms full, or why we answered the phone a particular way. It's a verbal script for what we're doing. It can be really, really helpful. Instructions don't need to sound like, and should never sound like, corrections. That's a really hard challenge, especially when maybe a social skill or a lack of a social skill might come across as a lack of a manner. That can be confusing sometimes. And so our natural inclination sometimes is to correct. We don't want to do that because we want to give information. We want to make it sound like we're sharing secrets and not lectures. Reading books together that have social lessons that you can discuss. Social stories, of course, for younger folks is a great tool. Creating real life practice opportunities. We don't want to compare anybody to anybody else. So it's where the language here is child, but adults, children, any of our development, I don't want to be compared to anybody. With my skill sets, I'm my own person. And we're all developing at different rates, especially for lifelong learners. We don't want to expect somebody to learn social skills from other people. This is really important, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception on this one. If you have an interruption in the learning process that impacts learning social skills, because social skills are learned behaviors, simply watching other people, if that was all it took, there wouldn't be a social issue in the first place. So the interruption goes past simply osmosis, right? If we're just going to acquire folks from or good social skills from being around other people with good social skills, a lot of kids would on the spectrum would already have great social skills from their parents, who likely have good social. It's not a matter of just being around other folks with good social skills. So there has to be direct teaching, and then for the practice piece, that's when we want to be around other folks that we can practice with. It's a hard undertaking to do it all by yourself. So you need a support system. That can be a neighbor, a teacher, a friend, a work colleague, job coach. But tackling it all on your own is pretty tough. We don't want to reprimand for social differences. You don't get a skill from a consequence or a punishment or a critique. You just don't. So if I wanted to learn to throw a football, and when first time I picked up a football, I kind of just fumbled it and someone came over and sat me in timeout. It's not likely I'm going to learn to throw a football well. Social skills are, I always compare social skills to sports skills, because they are training a muscle. They are muscle development. The muscle happens to be the brain. And they do develop quite the same way as a sports skill, meaning first we need the verbal explanation of what it is. Then we need the time to practice. And then we can set out into the real life event to see if we can do it or not. So don't use rewards or consequences to motivate skill development. That they're great once we have the skill and we need to motivate ourselves to use it. That is great. But rewards and consequence don't provide a skill. That's not there. So for example, if I have a shortened pathway, my ability to inhibit responses, so that looks like blurting out in class. If I have that neurological, difference, then I'm going to require support to develop that skill. You cannot give me that skill or that pathway by simply dangling carrots in front of me or sitting me in timeout. There's no development happening there any more than you could teach a reader to read by sitting them in timeout or dangling carrots. Now, once I get the skill, and I have practiced to inhibit my responses, but maybe I'm not really motivated because there's not a big payoff for me, or I'm not connecting a big payoff right away, then, that can be a nice motivator. We don't want to focus on more than one thing at a time. So if you've ever tried to make a behavioral change, wow, it's overwhelming. Just one thing. And, one of the examples I like to use is and you can do this with me if you're at home. I can't even see you do it, so I'm going to pretend you are doing it. Let's, cross our arms like this, like how you normally would cross your arms. So, if you're standing around, you want to cross your arms. Our brain is wired to, either cross left over right or right over left. So just have a notice on how you do it. Maybe it's right over left. If I told you to do it the other way now, so you change, and then I told you, okay, you're going to do this for the rest of your life, this weird, new, uncomfortable way that does not feel natural. Chances are it wouldn't be very long before you'd forget and you're going to go back. And then you're going to have to practice again, and then you're going to go back, and then you're going to practice again. Eventually, you'll learn to do it the other way. For decades, people forced left-handers to write with their right hand, and eventually they learned to do it. It was terrible, but they did it, and you can train your brain to do it, but it's difficult. So now imagine trying to focus on that one thing and then a bunch of other things. It would be very overwhelming. So in our 8 steps, very overwhelming here. They're just fancy words for little things. Investigating. We just want any information about the child's diagnosis. We want to just know the traits of that child, their strengths, their areas for development. We want to talk to people who know that child, and we want to see if there's any further assessments that will give us a little more information. We want to gather as much information as possible. And we want to know the 2 things. We want to know the person's strengths, and we want to know opportunities for growth. So those skills that need development. We want to make a list of those skills. We talked about that already. We're going to make a list of the strengths too. We want to see where the child is with those skills. Behavior rating scales, interviews, and observational codes are what the professionals use to determine, social skills, and they're all very subjective. You can make your own, and I'm going to just give you an example here. So you will, if you can draw a straight line or, column, you can create something that looks like this. These are the stages of social skill acquisition. So the skill you see in this column, see that my cursor, I don't know if you see that, but the skill in this column is eye contact. The first stage in the natural acquisition of skill is the ability to identify the skill. You will have a lot of folks at the beginning stages of social skill acquisition be able to tell you what they should do in a certain situation. Oh, I'm going to X, Y, and Z. But then sometimes it comes to that situation, they're not able to do it, and it becomes frustrating. And I'll hear people say, well, he told me what, he knows because he told me what to do. Well, I can tell you how to play football. It doesn't mean I can run the length of the field. It's a very different skill to be able to talk about something and identify something than it is to physically do it. So the very first is we'll talk about, when, where, why, and how to make eye contact. And then the next step is modeling. And modeling is just the physical practice of it, prompted usually. So I might say to Johnny, hey, Johnny, show me what good eye contact looks like. Or I'll remind him, oh, hey, Johnny, the coach is speaking. Let's show him some good eye contact. And he's able to do with the prompt. That's the second stage. Stage is to being transferring it to real life situations without prompting. And that's obviously much more challenging. Some of the argument about social skill groups is that when you are in a social skills group, sometimes it's a little bit like learning football in a classroom. You're not getting a whole lot of opportunity to transfer the skill out into the real world. So when you're designing your social skill intervention, you really need to incorporate real life lessons, real homework. You need to have the skill happen in a setting, in multiple settings, so that transference can occur. So we want to create a list of identified social differences. And here's a few examples of different kind of umbrella skills that we could, identify in an individual. Before it's time to develop a curriculum, which sounds scary. Curriculum, we're just going to, a plan. It's a plan. A plan of how we're going to do this. And we're going to target one skill at a time, and we're going to create plans around each skill that needs to grow or enhance. So the plans can be really fun to come up with. You can Google a plan for pretty much anything. So you Google ideas to teach eye contact, ideas to teach apologies, ideas to teach, and there's a reference website here, socialthinking.com. Tons of ideas. Social stories, role playing, art, video taping, board games, T-charts. We can all use these things to illustrate and practice the skill. We won't want to waste our time with any of these suggestions that really aren't our individual's best modality for learning. So if conversation overwhelms me, I'm going to skip the reflections and discussions, right? That would be a kind of a waste of time. We want to see what the students' strengths are. So we'll pretend, what they like art. They really enjoy art. I'm going to try to center most of my lessons around art and visual aids. If I have a very concrete thinker who likes things in black and white, I'm going to try to use that modality, and I would maybe look at T-charts. And T-charts are fun. I think I have it on the next. Yeah, I do. Okay, so the T-chart looks like this. And it's a strategy borrowed from Michelle Garcia-Zwiener's Social Thinking. And it's an evidence-based program that has a lot of great tips and tricks. When people are concrete thinkers, they really like it clear. And this is a great tool. So you could use this for almost any social situation. The categories are expected behaviors and unexpected behaviors. And the rationalization is, you know what? When we're in a situation, whether it's the classroom, playground, a birthday party, a wedding, there are expected behaviors. And then there are unexpected behaviors. People like us to do the expected things. When we do the unexpected things, folks tend to have, very different thoughts about us. They're unsure. They tend to distance themselves. So for an example, if I was going to go to McDonald's, it would be expected that I'm dressed pretty much like I am now. Shirt, shoes, pants. I'm covered. I'm dressed up. Or not dressed up, I should say. I'm just clothed. But if I went in with a bathing suit and a sombrero, it would be very unexpected. And people might look at me and have odd thoughts. So it would be outside of what would be considered the norm. So these unspoken rules or these hidden curriculum of life, sometimes it's not obvious and needs to be broken out. So I like to, with my students, do these expected and unexpected rules for the playground, the classroom, any new or novel situation, and you can use this for first sleepover, for anything. Positive behaviors. We want to really create a connection to what is expected and what's not. And sometimes, we do the right thing. We just don't even know what we did that was right. You come out of a social situation, everything went well. And people are saying, oh, that attaboy, that's great. Good job. Good job. And you're saying, oh, what did I do? I don't know what I did. It's really important to give really specific feedback and to talk specifically about what was, perceived as a positive behavior. You can use fun and creative approaches. We want to make sure that we're feeling safe and comfortable in the environment. It doesn't need to be formally planned. Use informal teachable moments that come up just with life. Little ideas for lesson plans is, we can watch TV shows with the sound off and try to guess what the characters are doing by watch. That seems like such a silly thing. We can make a game out of this. And we're like, how is that helpful? This can actually train the brain on attending to facial expressions and body language when you don't have the sound to distract you. The physical practice of doing that, it's much like a physical practice of passing the puck at a hockey practice. The body's remembering it, the brain's remembering it, so that when the situation becomes more stressful in real life, the rote memory just kind of takes over. So we want to think of, practice as a real important key in developing these skills. You can look through magazines for collages with different facial expressions, and we can say we're going to find all of the faces that look uncomfortable. We're going to find all of the faces that look like they're really excited. And again, just a little more practice. We can practice, different tones of voice and how they can convey meaning, using your phone, your smartphone to record. Um, a fun little thing to do is to kind of make charades. And so, you got paper and scissors, you can cut up a bunch of little cards and write things on them like angry, scared, excited, happy, different emotions. And then in another pack, you can make phrases. And it gets to be really funny because you can pull an angry card, but you have to say it in a really sad voice, or you have to say it in a really happy voice. And so it gets to be a really fun, little confusing game that also practices those non-verbal communications. Little games, and I'm a big fan of little games, like you're on your way to the dog park and you can start to play these little games. You're on the way to grandmom's in the car. You can do these things that are really valuable practice. When we're trying to expand our attention, a fun little thing to do is that you can pick 3 sentences, and 2 of them are related to a certain topic, and then 1 of them can be random. And then you ask them to pick the sentence that's off topic. So I put a little example there that you can bring up the family dog and talk about how long they played outside and what they did at the dog park, and then say something about the weather. And then when you ask the person which one was off topic, that's practice, right? That's mental practice of distinguishing the difference. So step 7, we want to, again, that transference of skills, that's so important. We want to provide opportunities for the student to be able to take what they're learning from you during those discussions and chats and fun activities, and how to apply them in different environments. So, setting up little challenges, trying to involve other people, so that when they see or the person in the moment, they can reinforce things that happen. And a little tip there is, if you're working with a younger person, especially, and you could get the school's involvement, asking them, informing them each week of the skill that you're working on, the one skill that you're trying to target, and keeping the language consistent can really help to eliminate some of that language confusion. So, for example, if you're working on eye contact, that you communicate that language to the school, and so that you don't have a resource teacher using words like listening messages with their eyes, because it's not always a given that someone's going to be able to sift through that difference. Really quickly, we are going to look at a quick and little easy method to kind of give a mini lesson in the moment, and it really can be used a number of different ways. So we can use this method to practice a skill. We can use it to reinforce a skill that just occurred. Remember, we want to avoid some things that feel like corrections. And the reason I say this is because anxiety is a comorbid diagnosis that exists with ASD very commonly. And the reason, well, a lot of research has been done, the reason for that anxiety is because when you are constantly being misinterpreted and misinterpreting your surroundings, you are subject to a lot of corrections. And, it becomes like a touch on a sunburn. You will get to the point where feedback is always going to be a bad thing, because it just feels badly. And overcorrecting can lead to feelings of being anxious and avoidance, and all other issues that can come up because of it. So when we want to change behavior, we really want to be information sharing and less corrective, I guess, to say. So we can use this method as a way to address the behavior. And it really should sound the same whether we're practicing or the undesirable behavior just occurred and we want to go and provide the correct information for that skill. So a way to help generalize the skill. This is a way to make the connection in the social setting for the individual, and of course we want to do that in a very sensitive and discreet way. We don't want to be drawing attention, in a situation that could be embarrassing for the person who's practicing. So the 6 steps, this looks like a lot. When you practice it, it ends up being about 50 seconds. I promise you can get this down to 50 seconds of a very, very quick way to kind of hit all of those different learning modalities. So earlier we talked about how we have some of those learning strengths. All of us have them. Some of us take in information verbally better than we take in information visually. We might need to feel how to do it. And I like to use the example of, when you're getting and giving directions. And, some of us love to have a map drawn out in front of us. Some of us think that's confusing. Just tell me where to go. Left, right, down the street. When you see the IKEA, turn, at right. And then that's more comforting. And then some of us need to be physically taken there, right, in the car a bunch of times before we actually, generalize which way we're going. So we all have ways in which we take in information better. This is a method to kind of hit all of those, which will increase our success of the information being absorbed. So the very first thing is the verbal explanation of the skill being zoomed on. So if we're using eye contact, for example, as a skill being zoomed in on, we would say something like, hey, John, people really, really like to get listening messages with their eyes. I know you can hear me when you're hanging upside down or facing the other way. But you know what? People really like you to stop and look in their eyes, and it makes them feel good. Isn't that weird? We call that eye contact. And so it's a verbal information. Something I'm not that great at, but is beneficial, is using few words possible when you give your verbal explanation. So, keeping it short and sweet. People love eye contact. They like listening messages with their eyes. That's a nice verbal explanation of eye contact. The next thing is, a lot of folks can have a beautiful auditory memory. And they can repeat all kinds of information and phrases. It doesn't necessarily mean that the comprehension is full. So I always like to check for comprehension and ask somebody, the person we're working with, to put it into their own words. So I might say, John, did I do a good job of explaining that? Can you tell me what you heard me say? And if he repeats back my exact words, I would be like, well, how would you explain it in your own words? And I just want to ensure that they really have kind of grasped what was being said. So verbal explanation, and then you're asking them to put it into their own words. Then we want to physically show them what it looks like. So in this case, it would be just really short and sweet. I would point to an example on TV. Oh, look, that guy, he's really given some great eye contact. Or I would say, oh, you know, like right now, I'm giving you some good eye contact. Then we want to have the individual feel what it feels like. So very much like a sports skill, right? They have to know what the feeling is and the physical practice. So I would say, so John, you want to give it a try, and oh yeah, you're giving me great eye contact right now. There it is. So I can point it out, and that he understands. We want to provide immediate feedback when it's done correctly. So, or if it's done incorrectly, we want to also provide that feedback. So if John is maybe really intense with his eye contact and he's not blinking, and he's showing us that this is my eye contact, then we want to make those gentle corrections and say very honestly, wow, that looks a little bit intense. How about we try looking away or blinking or softening our eyes, and we want to make those feedback honest and realistic. When he's giving us the skill, the physical practice of the skill. Sorry, my cat just walked on the remote, if you can believe that. I apologize. So the TV just came on full volume, and he walked off of it and changed the channel, so now it's quiet. Sorry. I thought I was gonna have to get up and turn it off, but he turned it off for me. Smart cat. Oh, goodness. So anyway, so he'll provide the immediate feedback when he's able to show us the skill in its right context. Then we would give that positive reinforcement right away. We would say, that's it. That's a great job. You got it. After we have gone on and we're teaching, we've have our list, we've given the lessons, we're kind of keeping track. Remember on that chart I showed you with where our student is in regards to whether they're identifying the skill, or they're modeling the skill, or they're working on transferring the skill. It seems like maybe way too organized for the average family, you might think, but I really encourage it because it's such an undertaking. There are so many skills, and it can seem like such a huge task. It's easy to get discouraged and lost or disorganized in our efforts. When you have a simple little chart like that you keep track of what skill you're working on and where you are, it's such a great way to celebrate success when you look back. When you check in to say, okay, it might be hard, but gosh, we accomplished this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and it's such a great boost. And it keeps us, focused on where we're going and what the goals are. So you want to periodically, when I say reassess, I mean, something as informal as looking back at our checklist and saying, hey, where are we now? What have we observed? What have others in our life observed? And check in on those skills, maybe with teacher. Say, hey, we've been working on this, this, and this, or with our job coach. We're doing this, this, and this. And then, that person may have something to share. They may say, oh, I've seen Tommy or John do X, Y, and Z. And it might be new information, and we can celebrate that success. So we want to always prepare for any future transitions. There's always new skills required for every social situation. So thinking ahead to what the next step, the next situation might be, and preparing the skills that will need to be taught for that situation is a great way to help facilitate some of that success. Where we're going to go and keep growing. There's lots of social skills is a never-ending journey. So, you know, nobody has arrived in their social skill development. And I was telling the ladies of Autism Nova Scotia a couple years ago, I had taken an executive director's leadership course through Dalhousie, and we had a good giggle, me and the other directors, because it was basically our social skills curriculum, and the same skills that we're developing as our students are developing. So lifelong journey for everyone. So there's always room to grow and develop. Getting out in the community, finding out what programs are out there, what interests, what clubs. They're a great way to bring that transference of skills, to take those skills and apply them to real life situations. You know, find people that you're comfortable with practicing. I always encourage folks to, you know, start where you're comfortable. If I was going to begin to learn to play basketball, I probably wouldn't go out and start playing with the NBA right away. I would want folks who are also learning and developing where I am at. And again, when I'm ready for the next level, that's when, you know, we level up and we try and find a better challenge, or a bigger challenge, I should say. Another challenge, a different challenge. So yeah, that is what I wanted to share with everybody. Really excited about questions, and probably go on about the subject for days and weeks. There's some resources here, or at least some where we've come away with our information. If you have any more questions too on available training for students, parents, professionals, you can always give me a call or an email. We do that on a regular basis, and I'd be happy to help or try and point you in the right direction. I'll give it over to you, Leah.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Yeah.
I was taking notes and typing a few things, and some of the pieces that I captured were those executive functioning skills, likening that frontal part of the brain to that secretary that keeps everything just organized and prioritized and time managed properly. That was a really good example for me. And you know, having data to support the predictors lie in social skills and not really the IQ and academic side of things. And also the comparison you used for social skills to sports skill development. I think that that's something relatable for folks as well. Because yeah, you're right. Everyone needs a good coach, and everyone needs to practice to build in that memory piece. And
yeah, and the stages, like how we acquire them, you know, that first stage is really talking about the where, when, why, and the do's and the don'ts around that skill. But then you need that physical practice, but you don't want to do that in real life because you're just learning. So you need the coach to tell you, you know, how to tweak it, where, you know, to play out different scenarios. And then when you're confident, you've built that muscle memory, then hopefully you can draw on that in a real situation.
Yes, and of course the part of the importance of breaking steps down into the very smallest pieces to build on a skill, instead of again going all in right out of the gate. So
and
that was all wonderful.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a social skill, you know, to think of it in its smallest form. It's not something that we do naturally, break down these skills. And yeah, if you're a typical learner, you did just acquire them by learning and listening and watching. But if there was an interruption in that learning process, they need direct instruction. And so then we're stuck. I always say it's like astrophysicists trying to teach first grade math. You're trying to, you know, how do I actually introduce myself to somebody? Never really thought that. I've just always done that. But and stepping away and asking friends and other folks for ideas, it will really help when trying to break down that skill, because that can be quite difficult.
Excellent. All very good information. And I invite anyone who has any questions to please put those in the Q&A box now. I think there have been a few that have come in while you were speaking. And so I'll invite my chapter coordinator panelist folks to come back online as well and help us in providing answers to some questions and posing the questions forward. So Jill Cormier, who's from our Halifax office, would you like to take the first one?
Certainly will. Thank you, Angela, for sharing all your expertise and wisdom. It was fantastic. I was taking notes as well. So Leah had stated all of us coordinators obviously were there to offer assistance and support for any families within our local chapters. So the first question comes in, and it is, how do parents advocate for teaching social skills within their child's school, and what language should they use?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Firstly, it would be important to know whether your child is on a regular school program, if they've had formal adaptations, which go through stages. I think there are 4 stages of adaptations. Adaptations are a written document that students who have a disability are entitled to in the province by law. It's a human rights issue. So if you have a diagnosis of ASD, you are entitled by law to have formal adaptations in place for you. And so that doesn't mean that the outcomes to the program are shortened. So what that means is that the tools by which you get those outcomes are provided where you need them. And so adaptations can include social strategies. When there are social differences, now the term schools will be familiar with are social deficits, because that's what they will understand that will require intervention. So if it'll be the deficit that will require intervention, like a math deficit or, a reading deficit. So if I want to advocate for an adaptation for my child, then I would go in and I would say, my child experiences these social deficits because of their diagnoses, and they are entitled to have supports put in place to help them in this environment. And so what that might look like are things like a space when they're to take a break in when they're emotionally overwhelmed. That might look like time in the morning to check in with a resource person or a teacher and identify a social goal for the day. That might look like, the steps to getting the teacher's attention appropriately, written out and placed in the front of a student's binder. There's so many different strategies and skills that can be done in the classroom. And typically, the resource teachers, the guidance counselor, the learning center, they would be very familiar with these different types of strategies that will assist the student socially. Personally, I'm not a big fan of a common strategy used. A common strategy used in traditional school is putting a student who struggles socially and pairing them with a student who is rather skilled socially. That is a really that is putting a lot of faith in a very young person who if they're doing well socially, they're still maybe, 12 years old, and 12-year-olds, aren't benevolent creatures who are going to selflessly give of themselves. And they're concerned as well about their peer feedback and grouping. And so those aren't always an equal balance of power. So just be leery and question, when the teacher says, well, I sat Johnny, who needs some social coaching, with Sally, who's going to be his friend. A forced friendship isn't necessarily a genuine friendship. And a lot of our kiddos, regardless of the diagnosis, understand that. And it ends up feeling a little bit more condescending and deflating. In my job, if my boss took me aside and said, Angela, you're not very good at attending meetings. Here's Greg, who's excellent at attending meetings, and from now on you're going to walk around and watch Greg. It's just a little bit I don't know what the word is. It's not sensitive, and nor is it usually a strategy that gains a lot of that the student will gain skills from. Because again, if watching good social skills was a strategy for developing social skills, then we wouldn't have issues. So advocating, you set the meeting up, you don't hear anything back, then you go up the line of command immediately, and you copy as many people on the meeting invite as possible, or request. Squeaky wheel in our schools in Nova Scotia absolutely gets the grease. I'll just speak plainly. There aren't enough resources to go around in our school systems. There really are not. There's not enough of anything. There's not enough psychologists, DAs, assessments, money, resources. And it is the parent who, unfortunately, you feel like a pain in the butt. You feel like you're not making friends sometimes. And again, there are wonderful people in the school systems who want to do wonderful things. And sometimes like they have to decide where these resources get allocated. So you speak up, you say what you want, you say clearly, you reach out to people who can accompany you if if all schools have a different culture. Some cultures can be very intimidating to go into meetings. I've gone into meetings with parents who have been nervous advocating, and it was that parent and 12 professionals around the table all using jargon. And that can be super overwhelming. So take a friend. You're allowed to take someone to take notes. And you can say and advocate for yourself very clearly. This is so-and-so. They're here to take notes on my behalf. And they might just be moral support. When you have meetings, ask for the copy of the or and email the folks at the table a copy of your notes. Save all email correspondence where there are resources or adaptations promised to you. Print those adaptations out, keep them close by. This sounds very funny. Grade to grade, revisit the planning team, have the meeting again. Ask if they've been uploaded to TyNet. Ask to see that they've been uploaded to TyNet. TyNet is the system by which all the information is shared to all the teachers. So for example, if your child has formal adaptations that the teachers are legally obligated to implement for the success of your child, they may know them. It doesn't mean the music teacher or the French teacher or the substitute teacher or all the other individuals working with that child know them unless they're uploaded and the folks are directed to read them. And TyNet is that system that they're uploaded to, that everyone has access to. I've had many experiences where year after year after year they weren't uploaded. And the meetings head, and you go away, and 2 years later, nothing's been uploaded. So the request often is, you know, the catalyst by which it happens. So it's like, oh, could I get a copy of that? Can you just do me a favor and check? I would call the school receptionist to inquire if they're uploaded. And could you do me a favor? Could you check that they're uploaded? Any new assessments or psychoeducational assessments or information you share with the school, you want to request that they're also uploaded. So there's that nice paper trail. Sorry. And then when you have your parent-teacher meetings, you want to ask what adaptations were successful and what weren't, and examples.
That's a very good answer to a very complex question.
It's a long question. Yeah, we can talk about that for a long time.
Yeah. And we at the chapter level do get a lot of questions about challenges. We often refer people back to the program planning process guidelines that are on the Department of Education website. We also offer to be that support person to folks, to go to these meetings, to take notes, to also be there to ask questions, because we recognize when you're emotionally invested in the outcome of those meetings, it's sometimes hard to think clearly.
Oh,
and writing down the questions in advance before you go is a very helpful strategy as well. So that's excellent. Sam Gascoigne, our Sydney Cape Breton rep, could you please put forth the next question?
I will. Thank you, Leah. And thank you, Angela, for that wonderful presentation. The first question comes from myself, and it's put forth to your very clever cat. Does he have any Netflix show suggestions?
He was on YouTube, Sam. He's got a shorter attention span, and so he just went right for the YouTube.
Okay. Well, that's a good suggestion, too. You can get lots of cool things on YouTube. And TikTok. You have to introduce him to TikTok next.
That's a summer project, yeah.
So we're in the middle of a pandemic, did you know? And we're asked about social opportunities being limited sometimes, you know, with these face-to-face experiences, staying 6 feet apart, no more handshakes, all this kind of stuff. So are there any options or ideas for supporting social skills virtually?
Yeah. So, you know, and like I said, when a lot of times when we embark on the social skill development, we tend to jump a couple steps ahead. We also want to go right into that social situation, and you know, the pandemic on the bright side is a little bit of a good opportunity to step back and start on that beginning identifying phase of the skills. You don't need to be in crowds or groups of people to work on those identifying skills. You know, virtual socializing is another kind of mid-step we never had before. So it kind of puts a step between the identifying skills and a safer practice before you're really face-to-face, which is really neat. Did you, if you have a little search and you search up OutSchool, I don't know if folks are familiar with that, OUT school, they have these neat little classes. There's everything from like Harry Potter fan club to learning dragons, or learning karate, learning cooking, honestly, anything you can think of, and including social skills groups for different ages. So it might be social skills group with a self-esteem focus from boys age 9 to age 12. There's a cost attached to them. It's not a big cost. The groups, I believe, the ones I looked into were, you know, 6 meetings for $35. And they're facilitated by a instructor of expertise in that area that they're discussing, and the students log in and have certain meeting times. I think it was neat because the social times are around a specific interest. And so it's a very nice a next step, right? That you don't have to go way out of your comfort zone. You can stick, if you're heavily invested in trains, you're going to meet 7 other people who are also heavily invested in trains, and you can practice in your comfort zone, your social skills. So I really liked it. I thought it was really beneficial. Bridgeway Academy offers some virtual online social skill groups. So we keep a little waiting list. How we work with that is when there's an inquiry, we might put the age and the child's name. We keep track. When we have so many kids within that range, then we begin a group. So they're all over the place at different times. McPhee Center in Halifax, and I'm not familiar with a lot throughout the province, but McPhee Center in Halifax had to move a lot of their opportunities for socializing online. So they had a few different groups going, art groups, music groups, things like that. So there are some things out there, and I don't know if you folks know in other parts of the province what might be available, but I mean, virtually you can kind of join from anywhere, can't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been another silver lining, right? To the pandemic. We quickly tried to move a lot of our programming to a virtual format, and there's always that element of just creating that opportunity for people to come together, whether it's for a formal program or an informal conversational type of group. It's a good chance to build those skills and acquaintances that way. So, Rachel, that's our social coordinator. Got another question for us?
Yeah, we had a great question pop up in the chat. The question is, when a child is able to recite, what do you want? When a child is able to recite what you want them to do, but cannot execute, what steps should they take?
Yeah. So that is a great first step, right? The reciting, we want to check for the comprehension. So it's the first stage is going to be the talking about the skill, is going to be the child will be able to tell us or show us what they should do in a given moment, or the person who's learning. If they can recite, they may not know, if they're reciting a script, for example, they may not know or have a full understanding of what they're reciting. So the next step there is that we're going to want to check for comprehension. So we're going to try and investigate with that child if they know what it is they're reciting. So we want to use different scenarios. We want to use and encourage them in this point to use different language to describe the same thing, other ways to describe or show or tell us. Just to check that they truly comprehend what it is they're reciting. And then the next step is that we're going to do some physical prompted, safe physical practice. So I use the eye contact example because everybody kind of really understands that. So, stage 1 is that Tommy tells us, when the teacher talks to me, I'm going to look at them. It's important to give eye contact. And the parent says, you got it. That is correct. What about if your friend Jim says hello to you? What will you do then? And if Tommy can say, well, I'm going to look him in the eyes and give him eye contact. And we can test that comprehension by running different scenarios. and then trying to get him to change up his language around it. We can ask questions like, what is that person doing right now? That's really great, and see, you know, if they can grasp it. It's important. That question is really important because reciting doesn't necessarily mean comprehension. So this next step of just testing that comprehension would be really important before moving on to the physical practice. Because if you don't know why you're practicing a certain skill, or what, where, and how to use it, then, you know, it's a lot more difficult to use it correctly.
Yeah, that's a great question as well.
Mhm.
Annette, in our Southwest chapter, any additional questions to put forth?
There actually aren't. I think we've covered it all. So I have to say, Angela, your presentation was very thorough. There's been lots of comments coming through though, through the chat function there, just saying how great the presentation was, how relevant the information was to the people attending, and lots of thanks for all the information that you've shared tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so this is kind of a special timing for tonight's presentation because April is Autism Acceptance Month, and we use April as an opportunity to promote acceptance, promote understanding, advocate for greater inclusion across Nova Scotia. And so there's lots of ways that folks become an Autism Acceptance Month champion. So you can look for a link on the Autism Nova Scotia website, or you can contact your local chapter to see what opportunities exist for you to join that movement. And another important thing that's coming up less than 2 months now is the Walk Your Way for Autism Nova Scotia. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year, and registration is now open. We're doing an early bird prize draw on April 30th. And so anyone who's entered by that point has an opportunity to win a little prize. So good incentive to join and sign up, and, you know, bring a team, bring your friends, bring lots of folks along with you. And we'll be out there in the community on June the 12th to, again, raise understanding and acceptance and support the community. And last but not least, I believe we have a slide with contact information for all of our local Autism Nova Scotia chapters across the province. We will conclude that information into the handouts that you receive. Stay tuned as well for an evaluation. We always appreciate feedback, and we do these presentations on a regular basis. So we're always looking for ways that we can improve and deliver something that is going to be really valuable to the community. So I think that's a wrap for tonight. I thank everyone for being here, especially you, Angela, for taking the time and sharing your expertise and helping to really break down a complex topics into you know, the smaller pieces that we can then utilize to help support those who need it. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. And as always, I'm pleased to have the rest of our teammates here to support this event. And stay tuned. We have another coming up in May, and hope to see you then. So have a wonderful night, everyone.
Wind.
Lots of thank yous still rolling in there at the end. Yeah. And Q&A. You're on mute, Vicky.
I was just reading some of the comments.